Hey everyone, it's Types, and today I'm going to be looking at another card that recently came out a few months ago, maybe 4 or 5. I don't exactly remember, but it's Colress' Experiment. They came out in Lost Origin, and today we're going to be looking at it. Is it well designed or not? And honestly, this is a really interesting question because it's a card that's been seeing play, but not the most, but certainly a solid chunk. So let's take a look at, is this card interesting in a vacuum? And by the way, if you haven't seen the video where I go over the criteria of how I rank these cards, I'd recommend you check that out. The link should be down below in the description. If it's not, just leave a comment. I'll make sure to put it back there. But this card, what it says is look at the top 5 cards of your deck, put 3 of them into your hand, and put other cards in the Lost Zone. So, of course, Lost Origin is a set based around Lost Zone, and so unsurprisingly, we got to assume that there's some benefit to putting cards in the Lost Zone, which is interesting, I guess, but it's hard to say without knowing what those cards are. So really the big idea here is that you look at the top 5, you take 3 of them. You actually see 5 cards into your deck, though. So this sees more than some cards, and, so it's pretty solid in the amount of cards you see, but then you get to choose 3 of them, so you don't get all of them, but you generally get what you want. But then the cards you don't want, you don't get ever. So this isn't like, oh, you don't get them for now, you could get them later. No, they're gone forever. Lost Zone means they're gone forever. So this is interesting. You look at it and you think, is this good? I mean, you see 5 cards, so that's pretty good. And it's not like, well, you are losing them, but you're not like losing your whole hand, or you're not like losing anything else. So it's not that bad. And the fact that you see 5 cards, 5 cards is a solid chunk of cards to see. And drawing 3 of them is pretty nice. Then losing them to the Lost Zone, which really only makes sense in decks that play high counts of cards, that just want a little bit more dig. But overall, it's an interesting looking card. Not the craziest, but still an interesting card to decide whether or not you want it in your deck. And of course, there still is some decision making with the card as well. Other than do you want to play it at this time or not, is you look at the top 5 and you make a decision with these cards. And honestly, this is really fun because there are a lot of supported cards in the game that you don't really make any decisions with. And you just kind of play, and then whatever happens, happens. And so this is interesting, giving you a choice. So this gets a 9 out of 10. And I imagine some of you think this is a bit high, but really, it's super interesting. I'll talk about why later, but it's interesting because you can play it just as a supporter that sees some cards, and it's really nice. It's hard to look at these cards in a vacuum, honestly, but comparing it, I guess I'll mention some other cards. Notably, it's better than Hop, but it's really one of the draw 3 cards, because it is essentially a draw 3 card, that really provides value, and that's something that Pokemon struggled to do to make interesting for a long time. This is really, in my opinion, since I've been playing, which is quite a while, this is the first time they made a draw 3 card that's truly interesting and nuanced. So I really like it. Honestly, 9 out of 10. It's really interesting. Not the craziest, but a card doesn't need to be crazy to be interesting. That being said, is it interesting within context? And yeah. So as I was saying, it provides ability to draw, and that's pretty nice. But it puts 2 cards in the Lost Zone. And I guess that's a big part of why I got 9 out of 10, is because obviously it provides something with the Lost Zone. We don't see too much interaction with the Lost Zone, but of course, having cards in the Lost Zone just provides some benefit to you as well. So when you look at it within context, it becomes very clear what its use is, and it powers up some Lost Zone cards. We see on the right, Mirage Gate, being able to accelerate lots of basic energy of various types. Really, really interesting. It's very strong, but you need 7 cards in the Lost Zone. That's a big ask. And then we have Cramorant, 4 cards in the Lost Zone. And that's a solid chunk of cards as well. And then it gets to attack for free, so that's interesting. Sableye doing big damage for if you have 10 cards in the Lost Zone. And so you see 3 cards, and these are really the 3 key cards. The 3 key cards for the Lost Zone package, if you played with it, because they all have different amounts of cards you need in the Lost Zone. They all have different effects, which is really interesting. They could have all, had free attacks, all kind of accelerated energy or reduced energy cost, but no, they're all really interesting, having unique effects. And so you see this interesting package arise. Of course, this isn't Colress' Experiment, but it's loosely related. So that's pretty cool. And then we also see Giratina V-Star, another card with its V-Star power. If you have 10 cards in the Lost Zone, you get an instant KO. So not as creative there, I wouldn't say. But overall, pretty interesting. And its attack here also puts 2 energy from attached to it to your Lost Zone. So of course, that's negative in the fact that you have to get rid of those energies, but positive in the fact that you power up Lost Zone, power up your ability to use that big V-Star power, and then Giratina V-Star overall pretty interesting as well because it does big damage, but it's awkward to power up, though it's a perfect partner for Mirage Gate, so that's pretty cool. And then there are some other partners, but really those are the 4 cards that get a lot of benefit out of the Lost Zone. But Colress Experiment isn't the only enabler. Keep in mind, though, it is the main enabler. The other 2 enablers, Comfy might also be the main enabler, with its ability Flower Selecting, allowing you to look at the top 2 cards in your deck, put one into your hand, put the other into the Lost Zone. So a little bit of dig here. Also, you see 2 cards very similar to Colress Experiment. You only keep one, you lose one forever. A bit more risky and a bit weaker than Colress Experiment. Being an ability, you can use multiple times per turn, and not being a big commitment supporter. But overall, pretty solid being able to put cards in the Lost Zone. And those 2 together really make up the package, which is really unique. This is only one set, and unlike a set like, for example, Fusion Strike, which had the Fusion Strike package, there was so much crammed into it. It was just so strong. We see this set certainly having a lot of strong options, but it's not. It's the only thing in the set isn't Lost Zone stuff. There are some other things, but really Lost Zone stuff is the focus. But it's made more unique and diverse, unlike the Fusion Strike stuff, which is pretty straightforward and boring. We also see Lost Vacuum in the set, another pseudo enabler that says in order to pay this card, you need to Lost Zone another card from your hand. And then you choose a tool or a stadium and put it into the Lost Zone. Pretty basic effect, but there are some more we could get into about that card being a solid trainer overall. But of course, it allows you to put another card of yours into the Lost Zone too if you choose to put your own card, your own stadium or tool in the Lost Zone with the effect of it. So we see these 3 making up the Lost Zone engine. Colress Experiment, however, is the main one. And the fact that it puts the most. Comfy allows for big pop-off turns if you're able to use 2, 3, maybe even 4 Comfies in one turn. But realistically, Colress Experiment is carrying the Lost Zone deck. And this deck is awesome, and it just enables so many cool combos, in addition to being an interesting supporter in its own right. So I think this very clearly deserves a 10 out of 10, because it's just super, super cool. So yeah, this is amazing. Looking at the card by itself, it's 19 out of 20. That's pretty crazy so far. It doesn't stay that good, unfortunately, with being fun to play against. You don't need counters to be fun to play against, and the deck's not bad to play against. But the Lost Zone stuff's a bit annoying. Sableye and Kramer, they're a bit annoying to deal with. And the Lost Zone doesn't really, unfortunately, involve much impact between the 2 players. It's really just one player doing their thing, and you can't stop them. The Lost Zone isn't somewhere where you can get the cards back out. You can't interact with your opponent's Lost Zone either, which is a big missed opportunity in my opinion. However, it's not bad to play against at any rate. It's kind of hard to make trainers that are bad to play against unless they're just blatantly obnoxious. And in fact, the counters that we see on the right here are pretty obnoxious cards. We see Misfortune Sisters and Napoleon V, both really meant to counter Comfy, though, so there aren't really too many ways of countering Colress Experiment. But they can punish your opponent for misusing resources. The deck's not that bad to play against, but unfortunately it's hard to counter, which is a bit annoying. Especially, I'm a control player, so a hard deck to counter. Doesn't mean it's a bad deck, but overall it kind of just does its own thing. And the player who's playing Lost Zone has a lot of fun. The player playing against it doesn't initially have a bad time, but doesn't have the best time either. So this deserves a 7 out of 10. You may be thinking, it's not that fun to play against. Well, 5 out of 10's neutral, I'd say. So we see it's above average because there are some counters that are kind of cool to run in your deck and that have pros and cons. And then at the same time, it's fine. There's certainly a lot of toxic cards to play against or not fun cards to play against. But Colress Experiment, it's kind of interesting, kind of cool as well. Just to see what your opponent's getting rid of as well. Sometimes you see your opponent Lost Zone some insanely strong cards. And you're thinking, wow, what are they doing? You're kind of thinking it's pretty fun and surprisingly thoughtful. because you actually get a lot of interesting information while your opponent's also working with information. It's kind of interesting in that way. It's not the best, but it's certainly pretty. It's good enough with 7 out of 10 here. And then is it balanced? Well, it's pretty balanced. So this might be a bit controversial as well. Is this card balanced? I'd certainly say it is, because it doesn't draw that many. It only draws 5, or it only draws 3. You look at 5. So looking at some of the best trainers in the game, and supporters, and really the ones that see play, we see Professor's Research, which sees 7. You do lose your whole hand, but you don't lost on anything. But yeah, this doesn't see 7, so it's not that good. Marnie sees 5. You see 5. You shuffle them, put them on the bottom, so you lose your hand temporarily. This also messes with your opponent, though, so that's a nice upside of Marnie. This sees the same amount as a Marnie, but you only draw 3 of them. You're losing cards permanently, and you don't mess with your opponent. So generally, it's not as good as Marnie. It's not that bad compared to Marnie, but it's worse, I'd say. And I think most people generally agree with that, especially when you look at the meta. It's not seeing as much play as Marnie in non-Lost Zone decks. And then comparing it to Serena, another very solid supporter, it matched up pretty evenly. So I'd say it's a bit worse, ignoring the Lost Zone package aspect. And then, of course, this is a better version than Hop, which is, as I said earlier, a really, really nice thing. Something that we haven't seen much before. I'd argue we haven't really seen at all before. Interesting version of Hop, but here we see a draw 3 variant that's super interesting. But it's not quite perfect. And this is where it gets a bit controversial, in my opinion. Colress Experiment, some people would say, is overpowered, notably with of course, the Lost Box package. I'd say it's not that powerful, though. It's certainly good, but it's not overpowered. Lost Zone hasn't ever, in my opinion, been overpowered. Certainly, it was arguably the best deck when this set came out, but a big part of that, of course, was the hype from a new set, which really carries over so much. You see a card just being, or a card with Colress Experiment seeing so much play because it's the new thing, right? But Colress Experiment is right now making up one of the better decks, maybe in contention for the best deck in the format. It really is it. Is it broken? It's not broken. Is it overpowered? Maybe a little. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. So I think that's pretty fair. So what's the overall total here? It's 35 out of 40. It's almost perfect. Yes, Colress Experiment is not quite perfect. 35 out of 40 certainly has some room to grow, but this is one of the best cards. If you saw my best design cards of the past year of 2022, you'll have noticed this is on the top 10 list. It's a really solid, really interesting, really cool card. One that's fun to play with, not too bad to play against. Overall, very solid. The one big missed opportunity, in my opinion, is the lack of interaction between 2 players' Lost Zones, which is unfortunate. But really, this card's really cool. I hope you enjoy this card. It's not too hard to pick up either. Uncommon, so comment down below what you think of it. I'm really interested to hear. But obviously, I think this card's pretty cool. And are there any other cards you want me to review? Right now, my other cards I'm considering, certainly Eternus VMAX is an interesting card, as well as Sharpedo from Evolving Skies. That's pretty cool as well. I'm not sure if I'll go into that one just yet, but it's got some interesting elements. There are certainly some other interesting cards. Those 2 are pretty well designed. There are some others that certainly are not as well designed. I may talk about something in the Mew Genesect package. I'm not sure. But overall, I'm interested in hearing your comments, of course. And if you enjoyed, I'd really appreciate if you liked. And if you want to see more, of course, subscribe. Then you got to see my content. And it means a lot to me, right? People say that, and it does. So, yeah, I'd really appreciate if you like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.